Oh, wow, this is so much easier than what we've what we've done in the past with the other groups. We're going to be live in about 2 seconds. Thank you, everyone,
just works.
for your patience. Matt, we keep them alphabetized by GitHub handles. So we are now live on YouTube. Matt, we keep them alphabetized by GitHub handle. Okay, sorry about creating the Zalgo there for a second. I had the link open. So I'm just gonna promote this really quickly. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us today. We are having our initial meeting of the modules team. We have 18 people with us today on the call. And I think maybe to get started, I'll just quickly name people. And if you could just say your name and a brief reason why you're interested in modules that may set the tone really quickly to what we're doing. So I'm Miles, and I'm really interested in Node web interoperability and making sure that modules that are written using no specific syntax for a runtime can run in both environments. The next person on my list I have is Benjamin Grumbaum.
Oh, hi. So I'm Benjamin. Hi, everyone. I'm interested in dynamic model loading and the new ESM in general and how it's going to work in Node.
Excellent. Next up, we have Gus Kaplan.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi,
Yep.
I'm Gus. I'm just kind of interested in the whole process. Really kind of new to all this, but I kind of found ES modules interesting, so that's what I'm interested in.
Excellent. Next up, we have Wes. Wes Wingham. Sorry if I'm pronouncing.
Hello? Oh, hello. Okay, good. So I'm with the TypeScript team, and I'll be responsible for implementing TypeScript support for whatever Node does for ES modules in the end anyway. So I have a vested interest in seeing it happen in a way that makes it somewhat easy for transpilers to let these systems interoperate.
Excellent. Next up, we have Ben Neuman.
Hi, I'm involved in TC39, and I wrote a modules transpiler called Reify for the Meteor web framework, which I also work on, and been thinking about modules for a long time. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you. Next up, we have Brad Faria.
Hey, I've been involved with the ES modules for quite a while now. My main interest is keeping this sweet spot where JS can work as a full stack language and expanding the sweet spot to other use cases using ES modules. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up, we have CJ.
Hi, I'm CJ Silverio. I'm CTO of NPM. With Chris Dickinson, I wrote an implementation of ES modules in Node that shook up the status quo by attempting to address some use cases we felt were important. Testing use cases exist that are currently supported in Node, as well as transpilation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up, we have Evan. Evan, if you're trying to talk, you're muted, so I'm going to unmute you.
Oh, sorry. Hi, my name's Evan Place. I'm a full stack dev, but I'm mostly here because I'm interested about the interop between Node.js and the browser. So I developed some libraries that work between both of those.
Excellent. Thank you. Next up, we've got Gil.
Hi, I'm Gil Tayar. I wrote some articles on ES modules. I'm really interested. I met Miles in Japan and got invited. My main interest is interoperability with browsers. My dream is npm install and then F5 in the browser. That should, from my point of view, just work. How? Not sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Gil. Next up, we've got, oh, my thing is going up. We've got Guy Bedford.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I've been probably thinking about modules for a little bit too long. I started work on a module loader called System.js back in 2013 for loading modules in the browser, along with the package manager, trying to consider how you could load modules in the browser as an alternative to the way that we were thinking about modules back in 2013. So with the dynamic module loading as the first class feature. And that was a package manager called JSPM, which I'm currently seeing if I can revive in some form to look at these problems. And we'll see where that goes. I've also been helping out a bit on Node Core, working on some of the modules implementations there.
Wonderful, thank you. Next up, we've got James Snell.
Yeah, James Snell. I'm on the Node.js, mainly interested in just making sure modules actually work. Of course, so that's me.
Awesome, thank you, James. We have John David Dalton next.
Hi, JD. I'm a PM at Microsoft working on web apps and frameworks. I'm interested in modules because I'm also the creator of Lodash, the most used NPM package in the Node ecosystem, and I'm transitioning to ES modules. And I'm trying to cover the cases for other devs wanting to switch to ES modules as well and make a smooth and seamless compat and integration path for that.
Excellent. Next, we've got Lynn Clark.
Hey, I'm Lynn Clark. I work at Mozilla. You may know me from doing code cartoons, but the reason I'm interested in modules is because I'm working with the WebAssembly folks to make, right now there's a JS API for creating WebAssembly modules. We want you just to be able to use WebAssembly as ES modules as well. So working on specifying that, and also very interested in interoperability between browsers and Node.
Wonderful, thank you, Lynn. Next, we got Matt.
Hi, I'm interested in the process. This is my first contribution, so I'm just excited to be here and contribute in any way that I can.
Awesome, thank you, Matt. Next up, Michael Dawson.
Sorry, I'm just unmuting. Michael Dawson, I'm another one of the TSC members on the Node TSC. And, modules and interrupt is an important issue for the Node and the ecosystem. So I'm interested in, understanding to the point so that we can support this effort.
Wonderful, thank you. Next up, we've got Rebecca Turner.
Hi, I'm the NPM CLI project lead. I also did the part of the interop work with the NPM module branch, specifically a translation step that does pre-resolving of node style bare deps into full paths, which is a way forward before we have loader hooks, because anything that needs standardization is a long ways out. So I'm most interested, although loader hooks are probably the thing that I'm most concerned about and most interested in seeing resolved in this through this process.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Next up, we have got Shawn Larkin.
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, so I'm Shawn Larkin. I'm also a PM at Microsoft on Microsoft Edge and Edge DevTools. But you might know me as one of the maintainers of Webpack. Webpack is a static build tool that allows you to use modules in your code, but then have it work in the browser. And I guess we've kind of worked alongside, Guy Bedford going the static route instead of the dynamic route, but kind of trying to talk about this discussion of how do you make modules work and how do you interop between two separate ecosystems, which are CommonJS and ESM. And so we've done a lot of work with this along with Babel and other toolings, and we're happy to hear, happy here to represent, the tooling space and web developers and their needs.
Awesome, thank you, Shawn. Next up, we have Waseem. Waseem, you're muted.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
There you go.
So hi, my name is Waseem. I'm a JavaScript developer from Paris, France. And this is my first contribution to the Node Foundation. And I'm here to learn more about the model process and architecture, and more precisely about the interop between Node and the browser. And I'm also here to represent the web dev community.
Wonderful, thank you, Waseem. Next up, we have Web Reflection.
Hi, I'm Andrea Giammarchi. I've been around JavaScript full stack for quite a while, and also wrote a few rants about current module status. And I'm interested in making full stack modules happen.
Wonderful. Next up, we have got Wes Wingham. I think you already introduced yourself, right, Wes? You're muted otherwise. I believe you did, so I'm going to skip over to Zack Schuster.
Schuster, yes.
Schuster.
Yeah. My name is Zack Schuster. I work as a full stack developer for a company called Cedar Systems out of California. We work mainly in education. I'm here because I want to learn more about contributing to working groups and being a bigger part of the development community that I'm now learning more basically about, especially Node, because I'm really been in Node development hard for the past few years. So I'm hoping that I can contribute, but I'm expecting more to be learning than anything else.
Amazing, thank you. So, excuse me, I'm gonna leave it to the floor for a second. Is there anyone who didn't get introduced? I was doing my best to go through this list, but it does not really pair well if I missed anyone. So I'm just gonna leave it to the floor for a minute in case I missed anyone. Okay, I'm seeing, so Jeremiah is on the call, but his connection is awful. So I'll quickly introduce him. Jeremiah is another technical steering committee member. He's been around since I.O. He's been heavily involved in our modules implementation since the beginning. I would say he's involved because he has a vested interest in making sure that this stuff is successful. But I don't have, I'm not Jeremiah, so I can't totally speak for him. I'm noticing we have a Daniel who is on right now. Daniel, did you introduce yourself? I think we may be just lost Daniel. Okay, so with that being said,
I'm actually here with Wesley. You didn't lose Daniel. He entered my frame. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. I just joined in. I decided it would be better to just join Wesley's room. Yeah. Hi, Daniel. In a great first introduction, I work as a PM on the TypeScript team with Wesley here. And I had some trouble joining the call just a bit ago, but everything's good now.
Okay, awesome. So with that being said, thank you, everyone. I feel like we just went through what will be the first 15 minutes of the next Avengers movie. It's like really cool seeing all the people that we have coming from different parts of the world, working on different projects and with different insight. It will be a unique challenge to make sure that we can remain productive and move things forward. But I'm feeling personally up to that challenge and excited to collaborate with all of you. So if you have the agenda document open, the link I will put one more time into the chat. If you have not put yourself in there yet as present, please do so. We have a number of different agenda items today. We have an initial goals document. I'm going to punt that to a little bit later. That is something that we have a pull request that's been opened by Brad. We have an issue about the scope of the team. We have an issue about managing signal to noise. We have an issue about guiding the design principles of our document. We have an issue about potentially doing an online module summit, an issue on governance and membership requirements, and another issue about how often and when we should meet. So I think that I'm going to put how often and when should we meet first. Looking at this, if you open its issue number 2 on the tracker, I suggested a bi-weekly meeting as the cadence to start. We did an initial doodle poll, which had a whole bunch of people answer a bunch of different things. I scoped that down to 10 potential times. You can see a link for the new doodle in there. At the current moment, we have 26 participants in the doodle. If you have not filled out the doodle yet, it was mentioned in the issue that we are explicitly going to be moving people who do not fill out that doodle to an observer status We have over 40 people in the group right now. And this seemed like a first good participation guideline. If you're not going to participate in letting us know when you're available, that seemed like a good line. I will be attempting to do an email out to everyone end of day today as an action item. Actually, before we start going too far, can anyone volunteer to take notes? This is in Markdown format. You just write it in line. So like, you know, we could do.
I'll volunteer.
Okay, awesome. So thank you, Zach, if that was you who said it.
Yes, that was me.
Awesome. So if we could take a note, just, you know, saying we have the doodle, maybe a link to the doodle, and that people have until Friday to fill it out, and an action item for me to email people to make sure that they see it, because we can easily lose stuff in GitHub noise. If you take a look at that doodle right now, you will notice that we have some times that are really highly voted right now, one being Monday at 3 p.m. and the other being Wednesday at 4 p.m. Those both have 23 participants who are open to using it. So I'm going to leave it to the floor really quickly. And the questions around this are, A, does the biweekly cadence work for you? Or do you think that that's too often or not often enough? And then the second one to the floor is, should we have a single time for these biweekly meetings or a rotating time? I would at least throw out there that generally when we do rotating times, we do that as the technical steering committee to make sure that people from alternate time zones are able to participate as well. So I will now mute myself and leave it to the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
When you mentioned times, what time zone was that in? Was that Eastern?
Yeah, sorry, that was my bias showing. It's Eastern Standard Time.
For Eastern Standard would conflict with some TSC meetings, would it not? Or are those at 3?
I will cross-reference this against the TSC meetings and other meetings in the calendar, which will, you know, I'll make sure there aren't conflicts with other meetings in the Node calendar.
So I think once every 2 weeks is good. No, I'm not sure who else here isn't based in the US, but for us, like in the Middle East, I think for me and Gil it's a good time. But Gil, feel free to speak up if it's not a good time for you.
11 is perfect. It's out of family time, so I'm good. 11 p.m.
Yeah, just to Jeremiah's comment, the late TSC meeting is 5 p.m. So I don't think it interacts.
Awesome. So following up from that, I will take the action item after Friday of picking a time, making sure it doesn't conflict with anything, and sending out an invite and making sure it gets added to the official Node calendar. Once we have that set up, we'll have a rotating meeting, and maybe after a month or two, we can revisit and see if the meeting time isn't working. We could also potentially keep this issue open as an ongoing thing for us to just discuss, but I think maybe it doesn't make sense to bring up in the next meeting. So with that being said, we can move to the next item, which is scope of the team, issue number 17. So this is partially around governance. And, you know, if we plan to charter, part of the process will be deciding on the scope of the team and what we're explicitly asking for responsibility of. The original scope of the group was ESM, but part of the CJS implementation may become part of our scope as well. I think that this is something we don't need to dive too deeply into in this meeting. This is more to get it on people's radar. Chartering is something that comes later on down the line. But for those who are new to Node, when we charter working groups, those working groups are responsible for that part of the code base and that part of our infrastructure. If it's something like the build group, the TSC is often involved afterwards. So if there's conflict around you know, those particular decisions, often we try to have the working group sort that out first. The idea would be that if chartered, the module working group would own our module implementation. So I guess the real discussion right now is if the module group would be interested in taking on the CJS implementation. My hunch and original thought was that we shouldn't, because it could create scope creep and create extra responsibility for us. That CJS required implementation has been around for a long time and has a lot of edge cases and a lot of technical debt. And I don't know if that's something that our team would want to take responsibility for. To Jay Dalton's question that he has right now about a separate group, I think right now that separate group is the general collaborators. There's no reason that we can't participate. We have a lot of collaborators in the group, but I can leave it to the floor. Also, so you all know, there is a feature inside of this program to raise your hand. And so if people are talking and you want to make sure you get a word in, I will be keeping my eyes on people who have their hands raised to make sure that they get their points in. So I'll leave it to the floor for a quick discussion on this.
So I can just have a comment. I don't think we can entirely remove some cross-pollination between systems. So there definitely needs to be a scope of what amount of CJS we are particularly taking on. In particular, we just had some PRs about package JSON and the main caches, and we might have more package JSON data coming in, which would be in sync between the two module systems. I think we're going to have to take that on if we want it to actually be a cache that works in both. And right now, we also have an open issue about loader hooks instrumenting CommonJS, which I would like, if people want us to get involved with that, to kind of fill out use cases and things that they want to instrument CJS for before actually taking on the rest of CJS.
Those two issues are still ESM issues. The fact that they're also CJS issues are fine, but in the end they are ESM. That still means that the scope is ESM only, I believe.
If I could just give a little background on the cache work, I was just working on a PR that went through today to sorry, can everyone hear me all right? It's okay. Yeah, to basically add caching to the ES module loader in Node. And we want to share that cache with the CommonJS module loader because it has a cache of the mains. So I think that's what Bradley's referring to, and there's also been some changes on that. So there are some crossovers, but it's really important that obviously that we don't break CommonJS. So being really wary of that and drawing that line. But there are points where we will be maintaining the CommonJS system, but maybe separate thinking in terms of maintaining and creating new features or changing it.
Okay, CJ has her hand up. CJ, do you have anything to add?
I just wanted to pick up on what Guy just said. We should scope ourselves to not changing the behavior of existing code. Perhaps scoping this from a user visible perspective might be the way to do it. This team should avoid making changes that would require work from any existing users of CJS code, but behind the scenes things as required by technical work we're doing for ESM should be fair game.
Awesome. And I was thinking something similar. Like, I think managing the caches is easily something that is going to become within our realm, because making sure there aren't duplicates in the caches and managing the caches is going to be something that's important, especially for interoperability. With that being said, I think that this is something that's a little bit forward thinking. And so perhaps it makes sense to move on. So I'll leave it to the floor for one more second in case anyone has anything to add. But otherwise, I think we can move on to the next agenda item.
I just want to explicitly state CommonJS is frozen. CJ is completely right. We cannot even table discussions that are going to change its behavior in a user-facing way.
Excellent. That's a really good point. And maybe that's something that we can add to like our general document if we add anything about scope to it. So next up, we've got managing signal to noise. This is issue 15. Take a look at it. I opened this issue. It was mostly around, there was a flurry of activity when we first started. I think it goes without saying, we have a lot that we want to talk about, and there's a lot of things that we need to talk about. There's a challenge here in how to balance general conversation from actionable conversation. So what I've done is a first pass at trying to solve this, and I'm not sure if it really helps. And if you look in issue number 24, labeling issues and PRs, and I'll put a link into the chat for people. I created a bunch of labels, and one of the labels that I created was a discussion label. And essentially the discussion label explicitly means that that issue is open for general discussion, and without the discussion label, the conversation is assumed to be very scoped. My hope would be that the original poster of the issue or pull request would request people to scope the discussion if it moves outside of the scope, unless the discussion tag is added. So this puts an onus onto people who are opening issues and pull requests to, make that request, which people may not be comfortable with. So this is an attempt. I'd like to leave it to the floor to make comments on those attempts or, suggest other things. John, JD, you were asking about raising your hand, so I want to just make sure, did you have something specific to add here?
No, I was just curious.
Okay, cool. Does anyone have any specific thoughts on helping to solve signal or to noise or this particular approach? So I will take that as a no. I will take as an action item to myself going through and actually documenting the process that I would like to see people have as maybe part of our collaborator guides. And then based on that, we can maybe kick that off to an issue. So the next one that we have on here, I'm going to just, before we get into design principles, because I think that is going to be a meaty one, I'm just reorganizing the agenda really quickly. Governance and membership requirements. This is issue number 8. So as the foundation works, working groups that get spun up or teams that get spun up under the technical steering committee generally adopt the governance model of the project. How things usually work in the project is if you open a pull request and that has more than one sign off on it, or sometimes even one sign off, and it's been open for at least 48 hours during the week or 72 hours during the weekend. If there are no objections, then it lands. If there are objections, then that kind of gets raised to the committee, to the steering committee, to see if the steering committee can reach consensus. If consensus can't be reached in the issue. I think as we're kicking things off, we can avoid kicking things to the TSC as much as possible, but that may end up happening with pull requests. So we do have the opportunity to design our own governance model if we want to do something different regarding the decision-making model. So I guess I can open the floor first to discussing the decision-making model, specifically the question of are people okay with the status quo right now, or would anyone like to take an action item of writing an alternate model or proposing an alternate model?
If I could jump in really quick, I wanted to mention, I said this in chat, my audio cut out again on me and I had to rejoin. So I can't be relied on to take notes. So if someone else wanted to be taking notes, then that'd probably be better right now.
Okay, so based on the silence, Jeremiah has a point. I think sign-offs don't need to be the same. We probably won't be committing as much other than core. I think that's interesting. I mean, if people are open to it right now, we have a large group. If pull requests have sign-offs and those sign-offs and there's no -1s, I think that's a reasonable enough way to move things forward. Are people okay with 48 hours as the timeline on that during the week? Or do you think that we need more time because because of the situation? I'll leave it to the floor.
Could we have more time?
Yeah, so Waseem, I'll let you go first, and then Rebecca, you'll be next. Waseem, what was the question?
Yeah, sorry. I was just asking if you could have more time, actually, more than 48 hours.
Okay, I think that that's reasonable. I would say that, yeah, more time to discuss these. So let's move it to Rebecca first before we start iterating on like what a potential solution there could be in case they have a good one. Rebecca?
So we have a big group, and that is hard to manage, and so I'm not sure I have a solution that scales. But I'm concerned about the default tacit approval model, which is essentially tacit approval is assumed if we receive silence. I feel like we should have at least some quorum, minimum quorum, required to consider something approved by the committee.
Mm-hmm. So
otherwise, it's too easy for things to get like, you know, this is how you get like basic. You end up with things that go out, and then everyone's like, "Well, wait, when did this happen?"
So potentially, what we could do, because we need time to discuss, and we don't have like such a huge like fire to get this done in like a couple days, would maybe an alternative to that being that we have to reach quorum in a meeting to land pull requests. That way it's still kind of tacit approval, but there's 2 weeks, there's a lot of time. And I think this plays nicely into the next question, which was having to do with managing engagement. Do you think that's reasonable, Rebecca?
Yeah, and actually like pull requests are like the thing I'm least concerned about in some ways, because like the actual, by and large, I trust people to write code that is, you know, we're all pretty good at that part. The points of conflict, that isn't where our points of conflict are. That's what it comes down to. Like the stuff that we need to hash through and come to consensus on are unlikely to be code changes, except where those code changes are implementing a policy that we haven't yet all agreed on.
That makes sense. To expand on the context there, I was thinking pull request against the modules repo, because that's where we're going to be documenting this stuff. We wouldn't really, at least right now, have any control over governance of the main repo. But I think it would be reasonable, for example, for any of the collaborators who are part of the modules group to, you know, block something maybe moving forward on core for us to review. But I think that that's something that we can approach as those situations come up. Jeremiah, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think trying it in the meetings might be a good first start. If we actually do get that much that we can't do it in a meeting, we can scale back.
Okay, excellent. So as our first order of business, kind of recursively iterating on this process before it's even happened, do we have quorum within this that we want pull requests to only land in the modules repo that have been that have had quorum reached within a meeting? Do we have any objectors to that?
It's difficult for me to object, but that sounds not a bit too much. I mean, that means the PRs will be landing only once every 2 weeks.
That is the case. With that being said, Gil, we can iterate on this process at any time. And so I think to Jeremiah's point, if this seems to slow us down, then we can iterate. And for context, it's only PRs against the modules repo.
Right.
So
I'm good.
Okay, cool. So would anyone like to take the action item of documenting this in the repo?
I can do it. So do we have a specific quorum we're trying to seek? 50% or what?
I think falling back to like, and Rebecca, correct me if you don't appreciate this, but tacit approval of quorum in a combination of in the pull request and within the meeting. If we have no dissenters, then we move forward. Seems like the simpler thing. Alternatively, we could reach a quorum within the meeting with dissenters. But I would prefer to start to keep closer to the process that we already have, and then iterate if we find that that process is blocking us.
So a quorum would really just mean that, like, if we have one of these meetings and only 4 people show up, then they don't get to decide everything. It has nothing to do, it's still a consensus model amongst people who choose to be present, but I'm fine with saying that it's based on tacit approval within the meeting itself. So if nobody dissents within the meeting itself, yeah, I think that I feel much more comfortable about that.
Excellent. And then I would say quorum rules for the meeting based on our other meetings is a quorum is 50% of the working group.
Sounds good.
Okay, excellent. So as an action item moving forward, and I'll just state this one more time, we are going to introduce a governance model whereby pull requests in the module repo will only land if there is tacit approval in both the pull request and a meeting that has quorum, and quorum is defined as 50% of the active members of the group. Once again, I will mention that we have 21 people on the call right now, which is actually really close to us having quorum based on the group, but that people who have not participated in this meeting and have not filled out the schedule will be moved to observer status on Friday. And we will take everything that's happened in this meeting as being binding. I don't think that that sounds unreasonable. Alternatively, I mean, based on our model that we've tentatively agreed to, we would need to have this brought up in another meeting to actually land. So, we have a chicken and egg problem here, but I'm personally comfortable with it. So I will once more give to the floor. Do we have anyone who objects to this series of actions?
It's just a question, if that's okay. When you say 50% of the active members, do you mean people who are participating within a thread or PR or who are on the meeting, or do you just mean people who are like part of the group itself?
The team itself. So right now the team is 44 people. My estimate is that we will move between probably 26 and 35 people once some of the people get moved to observer status on Friday, and it would be 50% of the team members being present in a meeting. And if we have problems reaching quorum, this leads into the next item that we have within this, which is membership requirements. Within the technical steering committee, we have in the past had issues. Actually, before I get into this, Ben has his hand up. Ben, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Just real quick, if someone can't attend the meeting, can they vote like ahead of time on the pull request or on the issue, or does that like not work in the model, on this model, like in this model?
So I would imagine in this model, similar to core, it's more about making sure there are not dissenters. So you could have your explicit approval by doing an LGTM and a sign off on the pull request. Because in theory, if we don't have quorum, but if the group of people who are in the meeting plus the people who have signed off reaches quorum, we can maybe work rules around that if we have problems with meeting attendance. But I particularly imagine that this is separate from this, but if we don't have quorum in a meeting, we shouldn't be making discussions that are binding or we probably should potentially even cancel the meeting. So this is more about can the meeting move forward without quorum in the group, and should the decision be made? So I think once this is documented, maybe we could kick this off to the pull request where we actually introduce this process, and maybe it would be a little bit clearer there. Does that answer your questions?
Yeah. Thanks.
Excellent. So now this does bring up the question of membership requirements. So when we require a quorum to make decisions, that means that we require quorum to do things, and potentially even quorum to have meetings. Gus just mentioned in the chat, we probably shouldn't cancel meetings. It's a lot easier to reach quorum with actual talking. So to speak to that, Gus, the quorum that we're talking about is attendance and not necessarily quorum as in everyone agreeing to something. So the idea would be that if we don't have at least half of the group there, we probably shouldn't be having these discussions because we're leaving out so many of the stakeholders. But with this being said, I think that there is a clear signal, especially early on, that if we can't reach quorum, that we have people who are not actively engaged enough and that we have problems with engagement. So we have just come up with like our first membership requirement, but that's kind of a one-off. Do we want to introduce any rules around membership requirement that would move people to observer status if, for example, they don't attend a certain number of meetings or don't participate in the issue tracker? These can become really arbitrary to do, but a good example would be if we have someone who filled out the doodle but does not attend a single meeting, nor do they participate in the issue tracker for like the span of 2 months. Should they maintain their ability of being a member in the group? Keep in mind that if we want to get chartered, at the point that we get chartered, this group is going to have, like, for lack of a better term, control over parts of the code base. Any one person within this group could dissent. And it isn't really fair to the people who are active to have someone who is not active kind of just show up when they have business that they want to be able to control. It kind of actually, having people in our consensus model that are not actively participating hijacks the model. Gus has their hand up. I'll let them speak. Gus?
I'm thinking on that note, like, if we have, like, right now it seems like there's a lot of stuff that really needs to get addressed. So like for the first few, like maybe like the first, I don't know how long, but for while we're like getting settled, maybe having stricter membership requirements. And then once things kind of settle down a little bit, if people, you know, have other things they need to work on, maybe like 2 months isn't as unreasonable at that point.
Mm-hmm. That seems fair. I also think, and like one of the things that we do for the TSC is that there's a combination of membership requirements and it's more of an or. So it's like, if you are able, like it's the tracker or the meetings, and you need to actually have a lack of engagement in both in order to be considered not engaged. Wes has their hand up.
Yeah, are we unmuted? Okay, great. So I guess the concern that I have is like there are certain things that will be potentially outside of, you know, my scope in terms of like what we can contribute, right? But we, you know, if we're not necessarily deep diving on, you know, caching modules necessarily, but we're more interested in like the interop problems that may come up. You know, is there a good way to surface, you know, we're still active in some capacity, right? Or is it just a matter of like, we should always just continue being active no matter what the issue is?
So I think activity is not defined as like you need to be active on everything. It's just like, are you participating? So if you're just not commenting on everything and you're on anything and you're not coming to any meetings, you're not an active participant. And maybe what would be a good way to do this, and I'll just make a suggestion and then Gil, I see your hand is up. Maybe we just run for a month or two and then we just, as a group, review our membership and review participation and ask people who have not been active to move to an observer status. And if that causes a problem, then we can iterate. I have a bit of anxiety around having it be such an undefined thing long-term, and it's also not really fair. But I think if we set a clear expectation as a group early on, and maybe we even just document this one thing, like in the first 2 months, if you are not active, you will be moved to an observer status and just have a slight definition of what active is. I think something like that is, you know, a clear action item. Gil?
Yeah, I think it's a good suggestion, although it's a bit sensitive to ask somebody to step aside because they haven't been participating. That is why I prefer a harder rule. And you suggested participation in meetings or in the issue tracker. I would go even harder, even on myself. I think participation in both is necessary. I mean, just attending meetings is actually pretty easy, but the real work is going on in the issue tracker and in the pull requests. And I think that is where participation should be. And if I'm not going to be there, I would willingly, you know, step down and be just an observer. But I think we should set these as harder rules and not be, you know, soft. We have a big group here. It's big.
Okay, excellent. So with that being said, I think we should maybe kick this conversation back to the issue tracker. For those of you who voiced opinions and have thoughts on this, please contribute contribute to the conversation there, and maybe we can find someone to write up some text that we can include in the repo, unless anyone wants to volunteer to take that as an action item right now. Okay, with no volunteers, we'll just kick it back to the issue tracker for now. The next thing that we have, since we only have 10 minutes left, I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I opened an issue for the idea of an online module summit. There's a lot of content here. There's a lot of people who have different needs and different thoughts around modules and knowledge. And so I thought that, you know, it could be a really great knowledge sharing exercise if we kind of planned a day for a teleconference where we can take turns presenting to each other the topics that we think are important. This can be recorded and put on YouTube, so those that can't participate can get it later. I just wanted to, I guess, quickly see, does anyone object to doing something like this or see a problem with it? Cool. Does anybody have the energy or motivation to take lead on planning something like this?
I can do that. That's Bradley.
Okay, awesome. So Brad will take the action item on starting to plan this. If you have content ideas of what you'd like to do, maybe start putting it in there. And then Brad, I'll follow up with you and maybe we'll create some sort of like CFP proposal process or just like a form so we can have a more official way of doing it. And we'll start scheduling content and then figure out a good day to do this. We could also potentially do it asynchronously. We'll iterate on that. Any other comments before we move on? Okay, great. Next one that we have on here, guiding design principles. Is guiding design principles overlap? I guess that doesn't overlap too much with what we were talking about before with scope. But I mean, before we actually dig too much into this, is there really a difference between our guiding design principles and our scope, or are those conflated enough that we should maybe merge those two issues?
I think they are very different. I think guiding design principles is the influence that causes us to get goals. It is not entirely related to our scope. Our scope is what we are allowed to do and what we are responsible for.
Okay.
So I see them as very different.
Jeremiah has their hand up. Jeremiah?
Is this really that different from the goals document? Is it? I'm not really sure if it seems to be.
I think it's just the foundation.
Could it just be a preface to the goals document then, or?
So my thought process was that the guiding principles are in turn then creating our goals, which are in then turn creating our actions. So maybe what we could do, and Gil, you have your hand up?
You can finish, Miles. I wasn't to barge in.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to say, because we have 6 minutes left, since we don't really have consensus on there, maybe kick it back to the issue tracker. But to Brad's point, maybe it makes a lot of sense to at least have another pull request separate from the goals one that outlines guiding principles and start iterating on that, or alternatively, include the guiding principles in the goals document. Brad, do you have a preference on that?
Since we should be allowed to edit our goals and our direction, I think putting it into the same document is fine.
Okay. Does anybody see any problems with that? Okay, great. Gil, back to you.
That's what I wanted. I think it should be one document.
Okay, awesome. So our last order was initial goals declaration. This is a pull request that was opened by Brad. I don't think that it is quite ready to load to land yet. It's loading in my browser, and then my brain broke on me.
I do not want to merge it right now. So,
do we have so maybe we should add a new label to make that explicit. I can take that action item after this. I see 3 sign-offs on it and a whole bunch of comments. Since it is something that we, have a lot of talking to do, I think it maybe makes sense to just use this as a way to bring it up to anyone. Does anyone have anything major about this document that you think is important to bring up in this call, or should we leave the last 4 minutes to respond to questions from the YouTube?
I have a request for clarification from Webpack. But that's also in the PR. I think there is some miscommunication on what compatibility we're trying to have with the browsers.
Sure. Yeah, we can take a look at it and clarify anything that we've left unmentioned.
Okay, excellent. John David Dalton's now in the room with Shawn. Awesome. So then with that being said, I think we can start to wrap this up. To the people watching live on YouTube, I am in the chat saying hi. Does anyone in the YouTube chat have any questions for the team? I'm not seeing any questions. For those of you who are interested, we have 6 people watching right now. To those in IRC, anyone in IRC have any questions? I don't see anything. So congratulations, everyone. We've managed to run our first meeting and not go over time. Before we close this up, I'm just going to leave it to the floor. Is there anything that anyone wanted to bring up or felt we didn't touch on, or just statements you want to make before we close this out?
I just want to say something that I say to a lot of groups of people. We're all here. We're trying to make things better for the future, for right now. And I bet we are going to have emotional tidbits and things are going to be rough at times, but don't hold it against anyone. We're all here to make this a good, better scenario.
And Guy Bedford has his hand up. Guy?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I know we're probably going to mostly be focusing our time on discussing the high-level concepts here and making the high-level decisions. But if people are interested in getting involved in working on modules in Node Core, there's lots of places that the existing implementation can do with assistance and help. Things like benchmarking performance, improving the tests. Error messages is a huge one that we don't have very good error messages at the moment. And so there's a lot of areas to work on it of varying difficulties. So if anyone's interested in that, you can reach out to us.
And Guy, who would you consider us to be?
I mean, anyone working on Node, so yeah.
You can reach out to myself. I can just put myself out there. Bradley Meck.
Excellent. Wes, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to circle back to the goals discussion because I had my hand up then but didn't get to say it. It'd be nice if we could also just document the justification for each of the goals that we add, just so in the future when we go back to it, we know why that goal exists.
Okay, awesome. If you could throw that in a comment into the PR, I think that's, that would be a good way to make sure that gets iterated on. Okay, great. I want to thank everyone for volunteering your time here. Some of us are paid to work on open source, some of us are not, but either way, a lot of us still, I would say most of us have a choice of what we decide to put our energy and time into. So I personally really appreciate every single person who is donating their time in this meeting, in the issues, and the pull requests. Thank you. We all have a shared goal of making JavaScript better and making a better user experience for people around the world. And I think it's pretty exciting that we get to work on this. So thank you everyone for a really successful meeting. I'm going to turn off the live stream and thank you again. I look forward to collaborating with every one of you.
Are we off?